All right, and so yeah, this is our last section for Module 5. I guess technically we skipped over section 40, but it's technically the last section, so still technically right. So section 41 is recommendation systems. And so this is a little bit different from what we've been doing for machine learning for the past like while, like, kind of using sklearn and going through this. But it's a very important aspect for, data science in general. So it's kind of a nice thing to kind of go through. We kind of brought this up before, but like, it definitely, I think it's the last lab in section 41 has like PySpark. So just know if you're going into that, you have to have PySpark working. And I know we technically skipped over that part. So just kind of know if you wanted to follow along on the, there. We're going to do a little less, we're not going to do so much coding today. I'm going to go just walk through like the concepts of some of these things. And then I'll kind of talk a little bit about matrix factorization, specifically about embeddings. Because I think they're really cool, kind of like approach and everything like that. And we'll talk about like what they're doing and how they can be used. All right, so just real quick, give me a thumbs up if you guys are on section 41 or who has finished section 41. Okay, all right, so you're still like partway through it at like most, does that seem accurate? Okay, cool, no, thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, so some of this stuff might be new, some of this stuff might be something you already saw in the curriculum, but we'll get right into it. And let me grab my window again so I can see you guys. I can see you guys give me a thumbs up or wince when I say something. Okay, so kind of introduce you into like recommendations, like what they are. So I'm gonna kind of start with like some little bit of motivation on here. So one big thing, if you, actually I'm gonna put this away for a second. If you think back in like, back in the day when we used to rent videos out at Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and everything, which I'm nearly guaranteeing that like these companies do not exist in any form anymore. But if you remember back in the day, they had like their movies and rented out, right? And stuff like this. And what movies did they have? Like year to year kind of deal, like what kind of movies could you find in like a Blockbuster? Do you guys remember?
I remember that when something big came to video, they'd have like 10 copies of that one. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of like a weird assortment. I mean, I'm from a small town in Appalachia, so we had a weird assortment of things. We didn't always have like the best things, but mm-hmm. yeah, like some comedies, some horror, some drama, and you could just kind of pick from what was there.
Yeah, so that's actually a great one right there is, for the most part, like when a big movie came out, you tend to see that the most common, like the big blockbusters that came out and stuff like that, like the summer blockbusters. And then things like, just popular movies, maybe depending on the area, there might be certain movies, but there'd be kind of like, oh, here's some drama movies, here's some comedy movies, here's some like romance, kind of movies, here's some kid movies, maybe a tucked away in the corner or something like that. And that would kind of be the basic idea. And this is when basically things like Netflix came out. And it's always weird for me to say this because really younger kids like don't know this at all. Is that like Netflix didn't start off with streaming, right? It was mailing DVDs. Essentially, it was like doing what Blockbuster does, but at a longer scale. And what's interesting is that instead what they did was, instead of looking at the biggest, like most popular stuff that they knew they could like rent out, Netflix was looking more at, like, they did those bigger ones, but they also looked at a lot of like more niche kind of like videos and stuff like this. Like I remember my father-in-law, he would rent out a lot from Netflix, like triathlon, like movies and documentaries and stuff like this, which, for most people, like not something most people are really interested in watching and stuff like that, let alone doing a triathlon. So like you can kind of imagine like very niche. And this is actually where it kind of motivates on like recommendation systems like the modern system. It's something called Longtail. And so if you ever heard of Longtail before, you might be kind of familiar with this, but this is actually where Netflix really got probably a lot of their business. People argue that this is where they were able to succeed over something like Blockbuster in Hollywood, where the idea here is that most people, what's it called? Like there are a few very select like movies that most people will like or will rent and watch and stuff like this, right? So like think of like the 5 most popular movies and stuff like this. Like pretty much just everyone will watch it kind of deal. But there's a lot of other like very niche movies where very few people actually enjoy it. Kind of like those triathlon movies and stuff like that, like for my father-in-law. Like most people wouldn't care about it, but there's a few select people that would like it. And the idea here is that Blockbuster kind of focused on like what are the most popular movies that will definitely get people to rent out. And what Netflix kind of ended up focusing on, and what we tend to focus on a lot more now in modern systems, is this thing like the long tail. Basically, it's like there's not that many people directly interested in this, but there's a lot of potential essentially. And it turns out the idea with long tail is that it's kind of like an exponential function here, or not exponential, it's a hyperbolic function. But the idea is that as it approaches closer and closer, most of the overall, you can think of like potential revenue or, you know, potential things that people will like rent out or, you know, really be interested in are actually more in the niche. Basically, there's more niche areas than there are very few movies. So the idea here is if we can figure out what movies to give, you know, or whatever thing to recommend to these very niche areas. And this is where basically we use the idea of like saying, okay, let's do something specific to that person or that user versus like just saying whatever the average is. Okay, so the idea here is we use some information to predict on this. And as we can probably guess, we use data science to do this, right? So this is kind of like where this has been really strong, where making these decisions are going to be super useful and really effective. And this is what, not just like about movies and Netflix, as you probably have, like if you do any Netflix streaming, you can see like Netflix recommends movies to you. This is also true for things like if you watch like YouTube videos or even like, you know, using Facebook or Twitter or other social media posts, sometimes that will kind of come upwards, but also it can be like for shopping, but also like even Google search and stuff like this. Basically, it's recommending things based on factors that it knows about you essentially, or people like you. And it's trying to figure out, saying, okay, like, well, maybe you're looking for this thing. And this can actually be really useful, especially with like, think of like very large data sets where like, imagine trying to figure out what movie to watch out of all of these like different movies and stuff like this. It'd be tough for you to like really determine which one to do. So that's the idea of the recommendation system. And that's what the motivation is. Okay, makes sense. I think for the most part, we're pretty familiar with this idea. So one way you say is, okay, how would we recommend a movie? So if I were to tell you, hey, what movie should I watch? What are some ways you would kind of like recommend a movie to me? And you can think of like a random person that comes up to you and says, what movie should I watch?
Well, you ask what type of movies they like or what genre.
Yeah, you might ask them like, well, what movies do you like, right? So I'm going to say like the really dumb way. The really dumb way would basically just say, hey, what's the most popular movie? And just don't even listen to whatever they say and just say whatever the popular movie is. But the next part would be like what Lauren's saying. You say, well, what kind of movies do you like, you know? And you might pick like a good movie from that, you know, set of genre or whatever type of movies they like to watch, right? So getting a little smart and stuff like that. Anything else we could do to kind of like recommend people's movies and stuff like that? What other things we could do?
We could see if we could compare that person to another person. Like, well, you know, I like horror movies. Do you like horror movies? Well, my favorite one is this. You know, try to align, try to see if this person's interests align with some known person's interests.
Yeah. So one is like kind of saying what movies you like, but also like just looking at the person. Like, for example, it could be as simple as like, hey, you're about the same age as me. We're kind of like the same kind of, you know, like at the same, on the same wavelength. I think you'd like this movie and stuff like that. So you could base it on the person itself. And that's kind of like what we're doing with recommendation system. So starting with the dumb way, which I already mentioned, is basically saying, what's the most popular movie? And it's like, oh, here you go. And then you get Minions, which if you like Minions, that's fine. That's fine. But I think you deserve better. I'll just say that. But anyway, the main thing is that when the easiest way, and this is what Blockbuster really was doing, is like, hey, here are the most popular movies, and do that. And this is really usually referred to as rank-based. So this isn't really talked about in the curriculum, but you can talk about rank-based recommendations where you basically say, what's the most popular, what's the most watched, what's the most, rented out or whatever. And this can not just be about movies, it could be about anything you're doing. So it can also be like the most views or like most listens to a song or something like that. So the idea there is like, we're not really considering the person, but we know these are really popular. So they probably, by just probability, they'll probably like this movie too. Okay. Obviously this has some flaws, like ending up watching the movie Minions. So not ideal, right? So the real reason, one thing we do is like, the problem is that we're not all the same, right? We all have like slightly different, like preferences and slightly different, like what we want and what we like. And so the smarter way to say, hey, like we need to go a little more deeper into just saying what the most popular thing is overall, right? And this is where Lauren's kind of way of saying it was something called knowledge-based recommendation. And the idea here is that we can filter out by first considering, you know, oh, like, do you like, you know, dramas? Do you like romance movies? Do you like comedies? Do you like detective movies? Like, right? It's like, oh, the most popular detective movie right now is Detective Pikachu. So again, maybe not perfect. You might be a little bit better than like, you know, just recommend the most popular movie. But again, you know, it's still kind of like in that way of like Hollywood Video or Blockbuster, where they would have like, you know, all the drama section and then like the comedy section and such. And like, it's a little bit better because then at least you can go to comedy and say, oh, I only want this. It is also can be from a website side where a user can say, oh, I want to have, what's it called? I want to select, you know, I only care about like comedy movies, you know, or whatever kind of like gives them preference to it. And then we only feed them that much. But obviously we can go a little deeper than this. And this is when we get into content-based and collaborative filtering. And this is what we'll mostly focus on for like this section, like in the curriculum. So for content-based, I think Jenny was kind of getting to this a little bit, but the idea here is that like, if you like one type of movie, maybe you like these other types of movies. So for example, you might say, I like horror movies, or like, I like this specific horror movie. It's like, oh, well, I think you might like movies that are very similar to this. So I give this little example. If you like Iron Man, you also like the other Avenger movies, which that seems to make sense, right? And so the idea here, this is from the curriculum's little image, basically, is that, you know, the blue person over here likes blue movie, and these two movies are similar. So that means this red movie here should be recommended to blue person. Okay, and that kind of makes sense, right? Obviously, this does have a little bit of like biases. Basically, you're only going to see movies that are very similar to each other, right? Which is not super, like, it's kind of more obvious. It's like, yeah, like if you liked watching Harry Potter 1, you probably would like the next Harry Potter movie. Like, it just seems to make sense. But you can also get into very similar things like, oh, like, well, you like, you know, kind of like these superhero movies. So maybe even though it's not a Marvel movie, maybe you like these other DC movies or other movies that have like these, you know, fantastical characters or something like that. So you can get the idea from there. Next one I find like really interesting is collaborative filtering. So this is kind of where we base a little bit more of like the person itself. And it's interesting how we do this. And we'll talk a lot more about this. But like the idea here is like, if you like the movie Megamind, I was like, oh, well, you're just like, you know, so-and-so, like my brother, like, you know, I bet you'll really like the Lego movie, which by the way, if you guys haven't seen Megamind, it's a great movie. I personally like it, but also Lego movie is a great one too, which I was honestly really surprised about the Lego movie. I was not expecting how much I'd enjoy that one. But anyway, the main idea here is that instead of going based on the person, or sorry, on the content right here, where we say, oh, what you watched or what you liked or whatever, and these are similar, so select those things that are similar to each other. Instead, what we're saying, okay, we have someone right here who has, or so this blue person has liked these two movies in this red movie, and this purple person has also liked these two movies. It's like, well, they probably are very similar taste to this blue person. And what's nice about this is that it means you might actually be recommended movies that you might not have thought of first. Like, so they might not be, these red, blue, and green movies might be very different from each other. But the person who likes these kind of movies might be very similar to this person. So this person may never even thought of watching this red movie. And this is an important kind of thing to do, is to realize kind of what information. One example I have, and this is where I have to share a little bit of a guilty pleasure of mine. Me and my wife really like watching Twilight, but not for the reasons why people probably should watch Twilight. Like, we don't watch it for the plot. We like making fun of it. Like, it's just so entertaining. It just makes me feel good inside. Like, it's one of my little happy moments. You know, if we based on like just saying, oh, like going over here where I watch Twilight and then it recommends other movies that are similar to Twilight, this might not work really well for me, because there's not a real, like, the reason why I'm watching Twilight, it's a different reason for most people watching this movie. Versus collaborative filtering, if I have a certain kind of taste and stuff like this, where maybe Twilight's one of my movies, but I'm watching a bunch of other things too that are not related to Twilight, and then I have this one, and someone's very similar where they also watch Twilight for maybe this more ironic reason and stuff like this. But then we can select that movie, say, oh, let's recommend that similar movie because they're very similar to each other. Okay, does that make sense?